Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine a machine. Not just any machine, but a piece of high-performance engineering. It's complex, precise, intricate. But here's the problem. This machine has been sitting in a garage for over 1,000 years. It is covered in dust. It's caked in layers of rust. And over the centuries, people, well-meaning people maybe, or maybe people with their own agendas, have been bolting on these aftermarket parts that don't actually fit.
Right.
They've been hitting it with hammers trying to make it work. And now when you look at it, you think, this thing is broken. This thing is outdated. This thing is dangerous.
That is a very evocative image to start with.
Yeah.
And based on the stack of research on my desk, I'm going to assume this engine is the topic of our deep dive today.
It is.
Right.
It is, because we are looking at perhaps the most debated, controversial, and deeply misunderstood engine in human history, the Quran. Specifically, we're looking at its operating system regarding gender.
Which, let's be honest, for most people tuning in, our learners, as we call them, is a topic loaded with some really heavy baggage.
Oh, absolutely.
When you hear gender and religious text in the same sentence, you usually expect a shouting match. You expect politics. You expect a culture war.
Exactly. You think of restrictions, you think of patriarchy, you think of silence. But that is why I am so excited about the source material we have today.
Yeah.
We are doing something completely different here. We aren't doing theology in the traditional sense. We're not doing politics. We're doing an archaeological dig.
We are. We're basing this entire deep dive on the work of J.R. Ahmed, specifically his text, The Quran and the Equality of Women. And Ahmed's approach is just fascinating because he treats the text almost like a scientist looking at data. He argues that there are two opposing forces at play.
Right, and he coins these two terms that I think are going to frame our entire conversation. The first one is the static distortion.
The static distortion, it is a perfect description. I mean, think about a radio signal. The signal itself might be pure, crisp, clear music, but if there's interference, if there's static, you can't hear the melody.
You just hear noise.
You just hear noise. Ahmed argues that centuries of interpretation, largely by exclusively male scholars living in deeply patriarchal societies, have created this thick layer of noise. They've projected their own cultural biases onto the text until the static became louder than the source.
So the static distortion is the cultural debris. It's the rust on the engine. It's the idea that women are secondary, that they're property, or that they're the source of sin. It is the stuff that everyone assumes is in the book.
Right. The stuff that might just be cultural residue. And the opposing force, the thing we're trying to find today, is what he calls the dynamic restoration.
The dynamic restoration.
This is the mission. If we strip away the history, scrape off the rust, remove the cultural lenses, and just look at the linguistics, the raw source code of the text, what do we actually find?
That is the inciting question. It's the whole point of this deep dive. If we read the text without the outside ideas of history, does the hierarchy between men and women actually exist, or does it just dissolve?
Ahmed's hypothesis is bold. He argues that the inequality we see in the Muslim world, and frankly in much of the religious world, is not in the book. It's in the history. And the text itself follows what he calls a universal logic.
Universal logic. I want to stick a pin in that phrase because we are going to come back to it a lot. We are looking for internal consistency. We are being empiricists today. We are looking for the logic that holds the system together.
He is testing the system. Does it hold up? Let's find out.
So, if we're going to test this hypothesis, we can't start in the middle. We have to go back to the very, very beginning, the origin story. Adam and Eve.
The classic narrative, the foundation of, well, everything.
It is the foundation of the static distortion, isn't it?
Yeah.
The story we all think we know. God makes Adam. Adam gets lonely. God takes a rib from Adam, makes Eve. Eve talks to a snake, eats an apple, and dooms humanity.
And therefore?
Therefore, women are dangerous, gullible, and secondary. The whole patriarchal structure is kind of built on that one story.
That is the cultural narrative, yes. It is the justification used for centuries to control women. We can't trust you. Look what your great-grandmother did. It establishes a hierarchy of blame. But here is the first massive glitch that J.R. Ahmed points out in his linguistic analysis.
Okay.
The character Eve, or Hawa, in Arabic, never actually appears in the Quran.
Wait, hold on. Say that again. You're saying the name isn't there?
Not once. The name Hawa is not in the text. The Quran never names the female partner. It just refers to Adam and his spouse.
That's a huge detail to leave out.
It's massive. And more importantly, the text explicitly rejects the original sin framework. It states clearly that both the male and female elements were deceived, both rebelled, and, this is key, both were forgiven. There is no fall of man caused by a woman. The blame is shared equally.
So the entire blame game isn't in the source code. It's a huge deletion of the static. Oh, we still have Adam, right? I mean, he is still the first man. He is the prototype.
Well, this is where we have to get into the weeds of the Arabic. And this is where the rationalist lens becomes really crucial. In English, Adam is a proper noun. It's a guy's name, like Steve or Dave. You picture a specific individual.
Yeah, a guy in a garden.
Exactly. But Ahmed argues that in the source text, Adam functions more as a collective noun. It's a plural concept.
The plural concept. What does that mean? So Adam isn't a person. It is a category.
Think of it like the word mankind or humanity. You don't say a mankind walked into a bar. It represents the species as a whole. Ahmed breaks down the etymology, the root of the word.
Okay.
The word Adam comes from the root udma. And udma is defined as the ability to live together as a community.
Wow, okay, that shifts the mental image completely.
Yeah.
So the text isn't describing a guy waking up alone in a garden looking for a buddy.
No.
It's describing the emergence of social humanity.
Yeah.
The moment we, as a species, learn to live together.
Correct. And if Adam means community or mankind, then the creation story isn't about a man being created first and a woman being created second as an afterthought or a helper. It's about the creation of the species as a whole.
But how does the text then explain the biological split? Because eventually you do need male and female. You need biology. You need two distinct types.
This is where the rationalist view gets really interesting and honestly a bit sci-fi for a 7th century text. The source cites verse 4.1. It describes the creation of humanity from a nafs al-wahida.
Nafs al-wahida. My Arabic is non-existent, so you're going to have to translate that for me.
It translates to a single life cell or single self. The text says, "Your Lord began the creation of life at the unicellular level, and from that single cell, it divided. It created its mate, male and female."
That sounds surprisingly modern. It sounds like cell division. It sounds like zygotes.
It implies a biological evolution, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But think about the logic of that. If the origin is a single cell that splits, you physically cannot have a hierarchy. You can't say the left half of the cell is superior to the right half. They are simultaneous. They are made of the exact same material. They are co-equal components of the same origin.
So the rib story, the whole idea that she is made of his bone, that she is a derivative of him.
Ahmed identifies that as a biblical fallacy, or what's known as Israeliyat stories that were imported from Judeo-Christian traditions into Muslim folklore. They're not in the Quranic source code.
They're cultural add-ons.
They're the rest. The source code says, you are one cell split in two.
That is the universal logic kicking in right there. If the origin is singular and simultaneous, the hierarchy it collapses. We are all just split housed at the same whole.
Exactly. And that logic, that principle of inherent equality from a single source, permeates the rest of the text if you know where to look.
Okay, so we have established that the origin story is fundamentally egalitarian. We have wiped the slate clean of original sin and the rib story. But we have to live in the real world. Men and women interact. They marry, they build families, and this is where the static distortion usually gets really, really loud.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. You hear men are in charge, women are followers, women are decoration. This is where the power dynamics really come into play.
Right. So let's look at how the text actually defines the relationship. And it doesn't use the word boss or master or superior. It uses a very specific, very physical metaphor in verse 2.187. They are your garments, and you are their garments.
I've heard that one. It is very poetic. It sounds nice at a wedding. You are my garment. It implies closeness, I guess. Like a shirt is the closest thing to your skin.
It implies intimacy, yes, closeness. But let's apply the rationalist lens. Let's stop thinking like poets for a second and start thinking like physicists or engineers. What does a garment actually do, functionally?
It covers you.
Yeah.
It keeps you warm. It protects you from the sun or the rain. It shields you.
Right. It regulates temperature. It creates a system of thermal equilibrium.
Ah, I see where you are going with this. You are viewing the relationship as a thermodynamic system.
Exactly. The source describes this as a system of mutual protection and comfort. Think about it. If you go out into a blizzard without a coat, you freeze. The external environment overwhelms you. If you go into the desert without coverage, you burn. The garment protects the wearer from the harshness of the external world. It maintains homeostasis.
And the key word in that verse is the symmetry. the reciprocity.
Yes. They are your garments, and you are their garments. It is not a one-way protection racket where the big, strong man protects the weak woman and the woman just stands there looking pretty.
No, it's a reciprocal shielding.
hmm
She is his garment just as much as he is hers.
I like the physics analogy. Because in a system, if one side fails, if one side isn't acting as a garment, the equilibrium is lost. The whole system becomes vulnerable.
If you walk out with a coat that has no back, you are going to freeze. The system fails.
Precisely. And the source adds detail to this function, calling spouses redressers of faults and keepers of privacy. Just as a garment covers your physical imperfections, maybe a scar or a blemish, a partner covers your character flaws. They protect your dignity in front of the world.
That is a much healthier, much more functional way to look at marriage than master and servant. It makes it a partnership of survival. You're a team protecting each other from the chaos outside.
It is about mutual survival in a harsh world. That is the universal logic.
But, and this is a big but, we have to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the elephant in the text, because there's one verse that seems to contradict all of this mutual garment stuff.
I know exactly where you're going, verse 4.34.
Verse 4.34, this is the big one. This is the verse that is cited by every uncle at the dinner table and every critic on the news to justify male superiority. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women. And, of course, the part about discipline, which we will definitely get to. But let's start with that first part, the boss part.
This is probably the most contentious verse in the entire book. And this is where J.R. Ahmed's analysis of the static distortion is at its most aggressive. The word used is quam.
Quam.
Traditionally, in the static view, quawam is translated as ruler, manager, superior, or one in charge. This is the word that builds the entire edifice of patriarchy.
Okay.
But Hamed argues that linguistically, quawam comes from a root meaning to stand or to support. He translates it as one who helps others to stand on their feet.
One who helps others to stand on their feet. That is a completely different vibe. That is not a CEO. That's a support beam. That's a foundation.
It is support, not dominance. It implies a foundational role, like a pillar holding up a roof. But here is the nuance, and we have to be honest about the text here. The source acknowledges that men have a functional responsibility in this verse. It says men are qawam because they spend of their wealth.
So it is economic. It's about who pays the bills. It's a financial responsibility.
It is functional and contextual. In the setting of 7th century Arabia, and frankly, in many contexts today, due to the biological realities of pregnancy and nursing, men often had the physical or financial mobility to provide security, while the woman was engaged in the biological work of creating the next generation.
So it's a division of labor, not a declaration of superiority.
Exactly. And the text explicitly states immediately after, women excel in some areas just as men do. It's a balancing act. That's the part that often gets left out of the sermon. The source emphasizes that equality does not mean sameness.
That's a critical distinction.
It's crucial in the rationalist perspective. Men and women are biologically different. The single cell split into two different halves. But the universal logic rejects the idea that these differences justify a hierarchy of value or status. It is a partnership of different components. If the man is the financial pillar in this specific context, it is a duty, not a privilege. It doesn't make him the boss, it makes him the provider of resources for the team.
Speaking of resources, the source lists some hard data on rights that were apparently revolutionary for the 7th century. We often have this idea that the West pioneered women's rights, but
The data in the text contradicts that timeline pretty significantly. Take inheritance, verse 4.7. The text establishes that women have an inalienable right to inheritance, a fixed mathematical share.
which, if I recall my history, Western women didn't really get until, the late 19th century in England, the Married Women's Property Acts. Before that, everything a woman owned became her husband's upon marriage.
Correct. For centuries, women in Europe were property. They couldn't own it.
Wow.
If they married, their money, their land, everything became their husband's. Yet here, in the source code from the 600s, you have a direct mandate for female property ownership.
And it doesn't stop at inheritance. It's about earnings, too. Verse 4.32. Women shall earn what they do.
Yes. To men is allotted what they earn, and to women what they earn. It's a direct statement of economic independence. And the source highlights a historical precedent here that the static distortion loves to ignore. Khadijah, the prophet's first wife.
She was a powerhouse, right? A businesswoman.
She was essentially a CEO. She was a merchant. She was wealthy in her own right. She was older than him. She employed men. She actually employed the prophet before she proposed to him.
She proposed to him.
She proposed to him. She was financially independent and in control of her own life. The text and the history establish her lifestyle as a valid, even lauded precedent.
So the static distortion that says women belong in the kitchen and shouldn't handle money is...
It is anti-historical and anti-scriptural, according to our source. It is a cultural overlay that contradicts the precedent of the very first, most revered Muslim woman. It is attempting to rewrite the source code to fit a later, more restrictive narrative. And there's more. Verse 4.19 explicitly forbids inheriting women as property and forbids coercing them into marriage.
So she has her own money, her own rights. She is a garment in a mutual system.
Yeah.
But we have to get to the hard part, the part of verse 4.34 that keeps people up at night, the part that gets translated as beat them.
The new shoes protocol.
Does the text tell men to beat their wives? Because if it does, all this talk of universal logic and thermal equilibrium kind of it falls apart.
This is where the linguistic excavation is most critical, and I want to be very precise here because this affects real lives. The traditional translation, the static translation, often says if a wife is guilty of new shoes, which is translated as rebellion or disruption, the husband should follow a 3-step process.
Step 1.
Talk to her, admonish her.
Okay, dialogue, that's good. Step 2.
Separate beds. Refuse intimacy.
A cooling off period also makes sense. And step 3.
And this is the traditional translation. Beat them or scourge them.
Which is horrifying. It sounds like a license for domestic abuse. It completely contradicts the garment metaphor.
It is. And J.R. Ahmed argues it is also linguistically incorrect. The Arabic word in question is darb.
And what does darb mean?
Well, darb is one of those incredibly flexible Arabic roots. It's a polysemous word. Depending on the preposition used with it, it has dozens of meanings. It can mean to strike, yes. The Quran uses it that way when talking about Moses striking the rock with his staff.
Oh, yeah.
But it is also used in the Quran to mean to set forth, like setting forth a parable, to travel, striking the earth, to seal, striking a seal upon something, or, and this is the key interpretation here based on context and logic, to stop, to prevent, or to withdraw leave.
To withdraw. That changes the mechanics of the entire process.
The source outlines the progression of conflict resolution in the verse. Let's look at the algorithm. Step 1, dialogue. Talk it out.
Civilized. Rational. An attempt to restore equilibrium.
Step 2, separation of beds. A cooling off period. You introduce physical distance to lower the emotional temperature.
Makes perfect sense. When you're angry, you need space. You need to step away from the immediate situation to think clearly.
Step 3. If that doesn't work, darb. Now look at the logic. If you translate that as beat her, you have completely broken the progression. You went from cooling off and separation to extreme physical violence. That escalates the conflict exponentially.
Right. It violates the universal logic of a just social system. You don't try to fix a relationship by assaulting the partner. That destroys the garment. It tears it to shreds.
But if you translate darb as to withdraw or to separate completely, the logic holds perfectly. You have dialogue, temporary space, final separation.
It becomes a roadmap for divorce or a trial separation. It's a procedural exit ramp, not a physical punishment.
Precisely. The source argues that the universal logic of the Quran, which describes the home as a place of sakun, of peace and tranquility, completely rejects physical violence as a tool for a relationship. You cannot force a garment to protect you by tearing it.
You cannot source a garment to protect you by tearing it. I am going to remember that. It seems the text is focused on resolution, not retribution.
And that leads us naturally into the topic of divorce, because if the darb step is separation, then the marriage is effectively over. And the static distortion usually paints Islamic divorce as this terrifyingly easy thing for men. The man gets mad, yells, "I divorce you 3 times," and the woman is out on the street with nothing.
The triple talaq. It sounds like a magic spell in a bad fantasy novel, like an incantation.
And the source identifies that as a complete fabrication, a cultural practice that has no basis in the text. The Quran actually lays out what we could call an algorithm of divorce.
An algorithm again. I like that. It is a process, not an emotional outburst.
It's a process designed to prioritize logic over emotion. It's called iddah, the waiting period.
Right, verse 2.228, the 3 menstruations rule.
Yes. If a couple decides to split, the text mandates a waiting period of roughly 3 months or 3 menstrual cycles.
Why 3? What's the logic there?
There is a biological logic and an emotional logic. Biologically, it's straightforward. It ensures there is no pregnancy. It clarifies paternity, which was crucial for inheritance and social stability in a world without DNA tests.
Makes sense. And the emotional logic.
It is a mandatory cooling off period. The text explicitly says husband and wife have the right to reconcile during this period. You can't just get angry, say a word, and end a marriage in 5 minutes. You have to sit with the decision for 90 days. You have to live with the consequences of that choice before it's final.
That prevents impulse decisions. It forces you to be rational. It forces you to engage the prefrontal cortex instead of just the amygdala firing off in a rage.
Exactly. And the source points out the no-fault concept in verse 2.229. If a couple fears they cannot maintain God's limits, which the source interprets simply as happiness, justice, and peace, they should separate amicably. There doesn't need to be a villain. You don't need to prove adultery or abuse. If the garment doesn't fit, you don't keep wearing it until it chafes you raw.
But here is the detail that actually blew my mind when I was reading this. I had never heard this before. The housing rule. Verse 65.1.
Ah, yes. This one is a showstopper. Never expel them from their homes.
Their homes, plural. The text explicitly assigns the home to the woman during this transition period.
It's a massive security protocol. The source emphasizes that the home belongs to the woman. Even during the divorce proceedings, while she's in the Ida period, the husband cannot kick her out. In fact, if anyone leaves, the implication is that the man leaves. It provides her with profound security. She isn't the one who has to pack a bag and go to her parents or find a shelter. She has the home base.
That completely flips the power dynamic.
Usually, in traditional patriarchies, the man owns the castle, and the woman is a guest who can be expelled. This says the opposite. The home is her domain, her sanctuary.
It ensures that the potentially more vulnerable party economically and socially is protected. Again, it's that concept of universal logic, stabilizing the social unit. You don't create homelessness and destitution just because a marriage fails.
So we have covered the home, the money, the relationship, the breakup. Now we have to go outside. We have to talk about how men and women interact in public. We have to talk about modesty.
The gaze algorithm.
Right. Because if you ask the average person, or even the average Muslim, what Islamic modesty is, they will point to a woman. They'll say, women covering their hair, women covering their faces, women hiding their beauty. It's all about what the woman does or doesn't do.
That is the static distortion, focusing entirely on the female body as the source of the problem, as a source of temptation that must be contained. But the source points out a major glitch in that narrative. It's an order of operations error. What is the correct order of operations?
Verse 24.30 comes before verse 24.31.
Okay, the math checks out. What does that mean?
Verse 24.3 issues the command to lower the gaze and guard one's modesty to men first.
Wait, so before we even talk about what a woman is wearing, whether she's in a burqa or a bikini, the text is telling men, control your eyes. The responsibility is on you first.
Exactly. Modesty is described as a tool for character growth, not suppression. The source argues that men are given the responsibility to discipline their own senses first. They are supposed to be the fashion police for women. They are supposed to police themselves. If a man sees something attractive, the command isn't cover her up. The command is look away, manage your own state.
That is personal accountability. That puts the onus on the observer, not the observed. But the text does talk about women's dress, the jalbab, the outer garment.
It does, but the source frames it very differently than the static distortion. It's not about confinement or erasure, it's about recognition. The verse says the outer garment is so they may be recognized as decent women and therefore not harassed.
So it's a signal, like a badge that says, I'm not available for harassment.
In the context of the time, yes. It was a signal of status and dignity. It was saying, I am a part of the believing community. I am a free woman. Treat me with respect. It wasn't designed to make them invisible. It was designed to make their status visible, to protect them from unwanted advances in a public space.
And what about the extreme side of this? The confinement. The idea that women shouldn't leave the house at all. We see this in certain regimes today, and it's often justified using scripture.
The source attacks this head-on. It references verse 4.15, which talks about confining women to their houses. But, and this is a huge but that is always ignored, it is a specific punishment for proven lewdness backed by 4 witnesses.
Lewdness meaning what specifically?
Public indecency, open sexual misconduct. And it requires the testimony of 4 witnesses to the act itself, which is an incredibly high burden of proof.
So unless a woman is committing public indecency in front of 4 people and is convicted of it, the confinement rule doesn't apply to her.
Correct. The source explicitly attacks what it calls the Taliban-style confinement. It argues that applying a specific punishment for convicted criminals to all women is an obscene violation of the text. It's like putting the entire population in prison because one person committed a crime. It defies all logic.
It defies universal logic.
Exactly. And the source notes that this punishment also applies to men in the subsequent verses. If men commit lewdness, they face consequences too. The street is not a male space. It is a shared space, with shared rules of conduct.
So let's take stock here. We have stripped away the original sin, the bossy husband, the violence, the unfair divorce, and the forced seclusion. The picture's getting much, much clearer. But we aren't done. We need to go deeper. We need to look at what Ahmed calls the grand linguistic reframing. We need to go to Surah 55.
Surah 55, Ar-Rahman, the Beneficent. This is the chapter with the famous refrain that repeats over and over, "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?"
It's a beautiful chapter, very rhythmic, almost like a poem.
It is. And traditionally, scholars say this chapter is addressed to jinn and men.
Jinn, we have to define that, usually translated as spirits. Genies, supernatural beings.
Supernatural beings made of smokeless fire, usually. Invisible entities that share the world with us. That's the common understanding. But J.R. Ahmed's analysis offers a massive radical shift here. He argues that jinn and ins, men, in this specific context, are not referring to ghosts and humans.
So, what are they referring to?
He translates the address as men and women, or more specifically, as different psychological types of humans that map onto masculine and feminine archetypes.
Wait, how do you get women from jinn? That seems like a big linguistic leap.
It's all about the root words, going back to the source code. The root jana means to be hidden or to cover. It's related to emotion, fieriness, hidden depths. The word for garden jana comes from it, a place covered in foliage. The word for an embryo gene comes from it, hidden in the womb.
Okay, so it has this core meaning of hidden or concealed.
Exactly. Ahmed argues that jinn here refers to the more inward, emotional, perhaps fiery aspect of humanity, which culturally has been associated with the feminine. And ins, usually translated as men, comes from a root meaning sociability, to be manifest and seen. He argues it refers to the more outward, social, rational aspect.
So it could be emotional and rational types.
Yeah.
Or introverts and extroverts.
Yeah.
Or even just men and women as the two primary modes of human existence.
And in the context of the surah, which discusses domesticity, creation, and psychology, the source argues it is addressing the two halves of humanity. So the refrain, "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" is holding men and women equally accountable.
That is a huge implication. Because if the text is asking both men and women, which truth will you deny, it means they are both considered primary intellectual agents.
They are both capable of perceiving truth. They are both capable of denial. They are peers in the courtroom of existence. It elevates the woman from a follower or an object to a distinct moral agent who has to answer for herself directly to the source.
The source also talks about the dual gardens in this surah. What's the interpretation there?
Yes. The text describes two gardens given as a reward for those who are conscious of their Lord. The source interprets these symbolically. It suggests they represent art and science.
Art and science.
Creativity and aesthetics, the two great domains of human intellectual and spiritual pursuit.
I love that. So the ultimate reward isn't just, sitting on a cloud. It is the mastery of art and science. It's an intellectual and aesthetic paradise.
And because the address is to both jinn and ins, men and women, the implication is that the text invites both genders to partake in this intellectual and aesthetic evolution. Science isn't for men. Art isn't for women. Both gardens, both domains of knowledge are open to both.
This connects to something else the source mentions, the term musaline.
Right. In Surah 70, it's often translated simply as those who pray, but the root word is much more dynamic. The source defines musaline as those who consolidate the divine system. They are the active agents who build and maintain the just society.
So they're not passive worshipers. They're engineers of the community.
They are the ones who guard their trusts, who stand by their testimony, who support the economic order, who are constant in their duties. And the source emphasizes that this group includes men and women.
Explicitly.
Explicitly. Verse 70.29 mentions those who guard their chastity, and then qualifies it in other places as referring to both genders. So the builders of society, the consolidators of the system, are a mixed gender team.
This brings us to the climax of our deep dive. I feel like we've been building towards this. We have looked at the laws, the economics, the biology. Now we have to look at the soul, the philosophical awakening.
This is where we need to slow down. because we are moving from the legal and social architecture to the spiritual and philosophical core of the text.
The light verse, verse 24.35. It's probably one of the most famous verses in the entire book.
So I want you, our listener, to just picture this imagery. God is the light of the heavens and earth. The text describes a niche, like an alcove in a wall. Inside the niche is a lamp. The lamp is in a glass. The glass is like a brilliant star.
And it is lit from a blessed tree, an olive tree. That's a very specific image.
Neither of the east nor of the west.
That is a fascinating detail.
Yeah.
It is universal. It's not bound by geography or culture. It is not an Eastern religion or a Western philosophy. It's something that transcends place.
And the oil from this tree is so pure, so luminous, it glows even without fire touching it. And when fire does touch it, it is light upon light.
Light upon light. So what does this allegory mean in the context of our universal logic?
The light is knowledge. It's revelation. It's truth. The source interprets light upon light as the layering of human intellect over divine guidance. It is the spark of your own mind meeting the spark of the text. It's the moment the engine turns on.
And here's the kicker for our topic today. Who gets access to this light? Who is this parable for?
Everyone. The source states this parable is set forth for men and women.
There is no gendered gatekeeper to the light.
That is the ultimate dynamic restoration. In the static distortion, women often need an intermediary. They need a father, a husband, a priest, or an imam to explain the world to them, to filter the light for them. But in the light verse, the access is direct.
The oil glows by itself. The potential for enlightenment is intrinsic to the human being, regardless of gender.
It connects back to the very first point we made, the single cell. We all come from that same unicellular origin. We all have that same innate capacity to glow. The universal logic dictates that you cannot block half the population from the light without darkening the entire world.
Light upon light. It is beautiful. And it is a philosophical awakening because it demands that women be educated, that they be thinkers, that they be philosophers, that they engage directly with the source of knowledge.
Verse 24.44 explicitly says, "Herein is a lesson for men and women of vision and understanding." The text expects women to be people of vision. It demands it.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. Let's bring it all home. We started with a mission to search for universal logic and see if the hierarchy holds up. We started with a rusty, broken-down engine.
And we found that the rust, the hierarchy, the violence, the silence is largely a product of the static distortion. It's history, not scripture. It's the aftermarket parts that don't fit.
We moved from the origin story, where we found a collective atom and a single unified cell, to the garment metaphor,
where we found a system of mutual thermal equilibrium, a partnership of equals designed for mutual protection and survival.
We looked at the economic architecture. We dismantled the idea of the ruler husband and found the supporter husband. We found rights to inheritance and earnings that were centuries ahead of their time.
We tackled the hard stuff, the beating verse, and found a logical roadmap for conflict resolution that rejects violence. We looked at divorce as an algorithm for fairness, ensuring women keep the home as a place of security.
We saw how modesty starts with the male gaze, with male accountability, and how the light of knowledge is an equal opportunity resource accessible to all people of vision.
The conclusion from the rationalist perspective is clear. The inequality exists in the history, it exists in the culture, but it does not exist in the source code. The text describes a partnership of different but equal components working toward a single, just social economic order.
It is a dynamic restoration. It's taking that old dusty machine, cleaning off the rust, scraping off the grime, and realizing it's actually a hyper-advanced engine that we forgot how to drive.
That is a perfect analogy for it.
So here is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. We want to leave you with a provocative thought, something to chew on.
If we accept this analysis, if we accept that the text defines the relationship between men and women as a closed system of mutual protection, a garment system,
and if we accept that both have equal, direct access to the light, to knowledge and truth,
then the question is this. If the text defines the relationship as a closed system of mutual protection and equal access to light, then every time society tips the scale against women, are we actually breaking the fundamental laws of physics that hold this community together?
Are we trying to run a thermodynamic system with one side deliberately left open to the cold?
Exactly. Are we surprised the society is freezing when we have systematically torn half the garment?
That is a massive question. It challenges us to look at tradition not as something to be blindly followed, but perhaps as the very thing that is blocking the signal, the very source of the noise.
The static distortion versus the universal logic. The choice of which one to listen to is yours.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Keep thinking.